History demonstrates that wars are easier to start than they are to end.
I think that's fair.
We have agreement. We have agreement. I think the Afghan war is a great example of that. After nearly 20 years of war, many are questioning the mission. In fact, many have been questioning what the mission is in Afghanistan for a decade or more, including President Trump. I traveled with him to the sad duty at Dover, receiving 2 of our soldiers home, and I know it affects him personally. I know he's been very public and very consistent, and I think very sincere in wanting to end the war in Afghanistan. Army Lieutenant General Dan McNeil put it this way when asked about the mission. He says, "I tried to get someone to define for me what winning meant, even before I went over, and nobody could. Nobody would give me a good definition of what it meant. Some people were thinking in terms of Jeffersonian democracy, but that's just not going to happen in Afghanistan." This statement was 13 years ago. When asked about our mission, General Douglas Lute said, "We were devoid of a fundamental understanding of Afghanistan. We didn't know what we were doing. What are we trying to do there? We didn't have the foggiest notion of what we were doing." This is from 5 years ago. How long is it going to take? What is our current mission? Why are we in Afghanistan? Do we have a cogent military reason to be in Afghanistan right now?
So the President's given 2 missions. One is to reduce our force posture, both the risk to our young men and women who are fighting there. The second is to ensure that there's not a terror attack that emanates from that space. We set about conducting a peace and reconciliation process. We've now reduced forces there by about half since their most recent peak. We're on our way to reduce even further. I'm hopeful that we will get the Afghans to begin their negotiation because President Trump has made very clear his expectation. We've entered into agreement that we'll go to zero. We'll get our forces out of there. I think it's May of next year. And we're looking to do that on terms that make sure we protect America from a
Would you agree that Afghanistan is just one of probably hundreds of places that we potentially have terror threats or radical Islamic threats, and may not even be no longer the primary place?
Hundreds, if you'll give me dozens and dozens, yes, sir, absolutely.
Yeah. And do you think that maybe it's, we talked about in Europe that we had hundreds of thousands of troops in Germany because there was the Soviet Union and they had, 2 million, 3 million people in their army, and we had this sort of Cold War standoff. But circumstances have changed, and maybe even your opinion has changed over whether or not we need so many troops in Germany, and I applaud that. I think the same is in Afghanistan. It's certainly changed over 20 years. The war on terror is now, it always has been sort of a global one, but I think it may be a 20th century idea that we have to occupy territory so much that we have to have acres and we have to have large bases, particularly in countries that are in prolonged civil war. But the other question is our goal in these locations around the world our national security, or is our goal sometimes muddied by the idea that basically, we're in Afghanistan for the Equal Rights Amendment or for women's rights, or we're there for, democracy or making a country out of Afghanistan? Are we there for building roads? We built a $45 million natural gas station in Afghanistan. They have no cars that run on natural gas, so we bought them cars that ran on natural gas. They have no money, so we gave them a credit card. My understanding is that the gas station was supposed to cost $500,000, cost $45 million, and is no longer functioning. So, is our goal national security, or is nation building part of what we should be doing as a country?
I think President Trump's made it unambiguous. Our mission set there is American national security, plain and simple. I'd add only this. There are times in the world where we are better off if there are democratic nations. The State Department is designed, right, to provide, to build resilience, to do this kind of thing. But I do think our foreign policy sometimes has been overly ambitious about what it is we can accomplish through the use of military force with respect to getting other nations to
I think
look more
encouraging
like
democracy and being supportive of democracy doesn't mean we have to pay for trying to institute our image in some other country, because it just doesn't, frankly, work. When we look at trying to end the Afghan war, I think in some ways we are stuck in the sense that people have decided we can only leave with some sort of treaty with the Taliban, some sort of agreement with the Taliban. I'm sort of the opinion that in some ways it might make it worse, because I think that the Taliban aren't necessarily trustworthy. And if we leave under the agreement that they have to meet certain parameters, which is what we're looking towards, and then they break those parameters, we're right back in, with a threat to stay in. I think it's almost that the threat has to be, and maybe the threat should have been this 20 or even 30 years ago. The threat should be that if you harbor terrorists that are organizing international terrorism, that there will be military repercussions. But those don't have to be landing 50,000 troops. It might be landing 50,000 bombs.
Absolutely right.
And so I think we need to think about and I think we haven't escaped. We're still stuck in this idea of we've occupied this acreage and we have to do something with it, and we can't leave until it's perfect. It's never going to be perfect there. And the only thing I would just exhort you is that let's don't base it completely on that we have to have a perfect deal to leave. I think there's always the threat that we can come back. And people say, well, there's 10 Al-Qaeda left in Afghanistan. They might be plotting right now. And, the president has admitted, you've said they're a shadow of themselves. The president has admitted there have been reports that there are, now we are talking dozens, not hundreds. We're talking dozens, not thousands. Same with the Islamic State. General Lute came and spoke to one of our committees recently, and he said he couldn't name any group there that he thought had the capability to attack the United States. And he said there was no evidence that the so-called Islamic State presents a threat to the U.S. from Afghanistan. So I think we do need to be mindful of that, but we do have to work towards finishing it. And the only thing I'd say in the end, because I don't want to finish this without mentioning that it takes friends of the president. The president has policy. People have to try to fulfill his policy. And I think for a long time, for several years, John Bolton was trying to thwart that. And John Bolton was an enemy of the president's policy. So I hope the people who are remaining will try to fulfill the president's policy and get us out of the war in Afghanistan. Thank you.